So if we could start with the slides, James. So you guys already know I'm with the Cedar Center. And so what we're going to talk about today might be a little bit different topic than what you've got in some of your other sessions. So I'm glad you attended. But what do we need to know right now in terms of what's going on across the country in every aspect of education at IHE level, got my electricity back, SEA level, and other levels? What is going on and how does it impact what we do, most particularly around the SPDIG, and then I'll equate it or relate it back to some of the work we've been doing in Cedar that hopefully can be turnkeyed and utilized to help strengthen our SPDIGs across the country as well. So next slide. So if you're anywhere close in the country to education, none of this is a surprise to you. We have a complex set of challenges, most particularly educator shortages, not just special ed, not just general ed, but everywhere and everything. It doesn't take long to learn this. Paraprofessionals, most particularly, we don't have substitutes. It's tough. It's very tough out there right now, and I think we need to acknowledge that and what teachers are going through. It's at the same time we have a need to mitigate learning loss from the pandemic. So talk about pressure, right? We also have seen states, because of the shortages, lessen certification and licensure requirements. And we see a dwindling pipeline, less people interested in coming into the profession. Educator capacity to take on more is very limited. And we've got grim working conditions and staff well-being. And this is reality. And it saddens me sometimes. It actually gets me down. Like yesterday, we did a session on this type of work and students and where they're at and educators, and it's hard. And I think we need to recognize that and figure out a system that we can make teaching more appetizing for all and down the road. But what does that mean? What are the implications for this? If you could go to the next slide. We have unprepared educators. We have instability in the workforce, meaning that we're undermining relationships with students and colleagues. Professional learning and growth is diminished. There's no time. I don't know about you guys, but I hear from districts all the time, our teachers cannot leave classrooms. We don't have that luxury right now. So there's really little opportunity to participate in professional learning. Collaboration time. Yeah, is that happening when you don't have teachers and you're covering for classrooms? That's limited. Increased referrals to special ed and increased incident rates are just bound to happen when you have teachers that aren't fully prepared. Obviously, core instruction is going to suffer, and we're going to have more students with more needs, which we already do, and we're hearing across the country. And then the lack of administrator support. And I almost wish I should have changed that to say principals are dying too. There's a lot of attrition of principals as well, and their well-being is being challenged in the same context, in this environment that they're working in. And if you think about a principal right now, or school leader, either they have novice people in their classrooms, or they have novice and unprepared teachers in their classrooms, and they're struggling, or they have teachers who are veteran teachers that are overworked and taxed and at the edge of their desk ready to leave. So we need to understand these contexts, because it has so much to do with how do we move forward and how do we create a culture and environment where teachers want to teach and they have passion for their work again. Next slide. So I wanted to go a little bit to the unexpected here. We can't think about our labor market in education without thinking about the labor market as a whole. And I will say, I've been in education for way too many years. And if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, thank you. And we often think in silos, and we don't think about the implications of what's going on across the world and what that does to our labor. So you see here, great resignation, right? 47 million teachers quit their jobs. And I wanted to put that bullet underneath there. Everyone is looking for improved work-life balance and flexibility, obviously increased compensation, and a strong company culture. I think this is critically important. Teachers have opportunities that they didn't before because the workforce is so needed and there's so much frustration. And there is a bidding war out there in every industry that there is. And we need to understand that, because when there's a bidding war, when it comes to compensation, we're not going to win very often. So we really have to focus on the work-life balance, the flexibility, and a strong culture. and working conditions. We have a lot of jobs, not enough people to fill them. Employers across the country in every industry are having to replace workers, which means they're retraining and training up people as well. They're giving retention bonuses, to sign-on bonuses, all the things that we've been trying to employ. And I think waste and error have increased because the workforce is tired. And it's not just us. And I do think we need to constantly think about that. We just posted a position at AIR for, I think it was a math expert, and we had over 250 applicants. If that doesn't tell you about teachers wanting to leave their roles, I don't know what does, because we would never get that many applicants for the type of work that we do. And it saddens me on a daily basis. But let's talk about what things we can do. Let's go to the next slide. But before we do, the last straw. Now, this is where I want your participation. If we could, if you are on video, I would appreciate it. And just unmute yourself. We're a small enough group, or you can put it in the chat. I want you to think about a day last week, or maybe the last month, where you felt overwhelmed, stressed, and unsuccessful. Just take a moment to think about it. And then I want you to either put it in chat or unmute, raise your hand or unmute yourself. What circumstances, context made you feel that way? And what would push you over the edge right now?
I can share.
Great, Mary. Thank you.
I feel like I don't usually get pushed over the edge. I don't know. It's been a life survival skill or something. So I won't get pushed over the edge, but my current context, which is very typical of many SEA grant managers across the country, is just there's so many tasks to be done. And it's really more than what one person can do, efficiently, at least with high quality. So that's it. But it sounds like I'm complaining, but I love this job. And so it's not going to push me over the edge. I mean, it's the second state department I've worked at. It's the nature of the environment. And so I knew what I was getting into when I started here. But that would be an example.
Yeah. And I think there's so many opportunities that we can help this, but you're right. So many new things coming at teachers, so many responsibilities, principals and teachers and all staff. And that's not alone in our industry either. We expect more and more and more with less and less and less. And I think we're hitting a burnout stage for many. And even if we're not burnout, because I feel very passionate about the field as well, Mary, others are, and we need to recognize it. How about others? Yeah, voice not being heard and to-do list growing and growing. Very, very good point. I've been doing a lot of work with my colleagues on staff well-being, and voice is important. And have we had an opportunity for that? And do we have infrastructure for that? If we're lessening collaboration time, are voices being heard? How much are we working together? Those are very important. Others? Let's not be shy. What else? Maybe no one else is feeling stressed or overwhelmed. Is that the case?
Hi, this is Rondalyn from Georgia. I think I agree with what everyone has said so far. I think I've come up with a way to kind of just deal with the stress. I don't know how healthy that is, but I do feel sometimes that I have a long list of things to do and not enough time to do them. A large part of my work, like many on the call, is providing supports to the people we support. And sometimes I feel like I try to give them what they need when they need it, as soon as they need it. And sometimes it may not be until the next day. So just always conscientious of trying to support the needs of all of the LEAs that we support.
Yeah, very good. And I think you mentioned the support when they need it. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, because I do think it's a different context today. And people are in resource overload, and they have multiple expectations thrown at them, some of which are things that they expected they would be doing, others that don't necessarily align with what they think they should be doing. And that makes it tough, because teachers typically come into the profession to help and do good. And when they feel challenged that they can't do that, it's hard to stay. And I think we need to keep that in mind. And I'm not going to say it's going to be easy, because that means we need to limit and cut down what they are expected to do. And trying to get people to agree upon what's really important and what's not is a tough thing. But I do think we need to give some allowance to let teachers grow like we know people grow. And we can't change practices all at one time. And we can't expect more of individuals on a regular basis than they can feasibly do and expect them to be satisfied and successful in their work. And those are just realities. And I think we need to understand that, and we need to make some changes, and not just understand it, but make some real changes for teachers. But let's talk about what we can do. Let's go to the next slide. So in today's context, what does PD look like? And I'm probably not telling you guys anything that you don't know, right? We've got to tailor it to the needs, allowing for flexibility. You know, there's been such a push to make sure that we are allowing for that flexibility, but I don't think we're thinking about the infrastructure as much as we need to. There's a reason we do PD days, and we will continue to do them till I probably retire. It's because it's hard to do it the way that we know it should be done. And you've got to really understand scheduling. You've got to leverage, you've got to think outside of the box. You've got to leverage talent from within. You've got to improve collaboration time. There are so many things that need to happen to ensure that PD works. We have to get educators invested, moving from pushing to pulling. And this comes back to that voice. I have done technical assistance for the last 25 years, and I can tell you, I have pulled people along way too much in my career. And I have realized over the years that just doesn't work. If people aren't engaged and invested, I'm pulling, and it won't sustain, and it won't be successful. And that is hard to feel and hard to recognize, because no one wants to give up quickly. But how do we turn it into a push for them pulling us along, and recognizing these are experts in the field. They know what they have to do. They know the challenges that they're facing, and how are we making sure that we're engaging and hearing their voice? I think right now too, providing real-time access to and support. Right now, there's not teachers who have the luxury of being out of classrooms for collaboration or anything else. And I've worked with districts where the school leaders say, no, you're not going to do PD. They're not going to get half a day off. They're not going to get this. We can't keep tagging it on to the end of the day. So how are we going to do this? And I think we've got to be able to provide real-time access and support to TA or services or PD when they need it. And also followed up with more coaching and hands-on shoulder-to-shoulder support. I don't know how we get around that, because right now we know that that's what it takes to help teachers change their practice. Making it ongoing, which I already talked about. Avoid adding more to educators' plates. Hard thing. We say it, harder to do. And make it collaborative. These are not new, but I do think the context is different. So what can we do? Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. I see over my career, and maybe you guys can tell me differently, and I would love for you to, so put it in the chat. I see not as much focus on the infrastructure that's needed for quality PD. And what I mean by that is, are we restructuring the teacher work days? When you are in charge of a classroom and you don't have planning time, can you ever possibly get good PD? We have to restructure the days. Teachers can't be in a classroom 24/7 and then expect to collaborate, improve their practice, support other teachers. It's just not going to happen. It's not realistic. I also see in special ed, most particularly, less support for leaders, school leaders, than it needs to be. School leaders need to understand how to schedule this. And what's going to be new, and I think we have to do, is differentiate the way we staff our schools and think differently about how we manage our classrooms and how we have teams together that support classrooms, not just one teacher in front of the classroom. How are we leveraging paraprofessionals? How are we leveraging teacher candidates or interns that come into our schools? How are we leveraging senior and expertise teachers across classrooms instead of just in their own classroom? If we don't do that, we're not going to get a workforce, in my opinion. or maintain one right now. And then how are we leveraging learning management systems? And I know many of you probably have learning management systems set up through your SPDIG, but how are we leveraging them? How are we providing videos? How are we giving them coaching and feedback from those videos? And then most particularly, right back to that, how are we setting up a system where I can go get the services and the supports I need when I need it? Because that's the only time, in my opinion, you really change practice, is when you need it. Because if you can't apply it right away, it's going to be tough. But tell me if I'm wrong there. I feel like in special ed, so often we talk about special education administrators, and we don't focus enough on school leaders. And school leaders are pivotal to our staff right now. If there is not school leadership support and there aren't these constructs and availability for us to do the quality PD and support for teachers, they're in a situation that's not tenable for success. And so I do believe there needs to be a lot more focus on school leadership support to help create these kind of environments. And Mary, you're right. Failure is cutting to the soul and spirit. It is. And no one can work that way for very long. Allison, I'm just reading some of your chats at the time. Yeah, nothing well. And I think this is so important. I feel this way almost every day. I've got so many things going on. What am I doing well and what am I doing fairly crappy? Do I choose to do something really well and then everything else crappy? And sorry for being a little unprofessional, but this is what you deal with every day. What's the priority? And it's sometimes I have to ask myself, what are we busy doing? We're all so busy. What are we busy doing? And does it make an impact? Right? And some of the things we don't have control over. Federal requirements, state requirements, there's some things we just can't control. So sometimes I work with people and say, think about your locus of control and what you can do. Because when you get out of your locus of control, you feel a lack of empowerment, you feel a lack of control, and that never feels comfortable for anyone. But I want to hear from you a little bit. How do we feel about school leadership and the efforts we have? Are any of you focusing on school leadership in your SPDIGs currently? And just unmute or put it in the chat. Or at least raise your hand. If you go up to the top button, it says view option, go to the annotate feature, or you can go down to the reactions below and clap or raise your hand or something, just clap if you are focusing on school leadership in your SPDIG.
Lynn, I would say we are not specifically focusing on school leadership, but we do lift up schoolish leadership as one of the essential components of infrastructure. So in Georgia, in the old SPDIG, and I imagine in the new SPDIG that we're getting ready to do, we talk about the need for a supportive infrastructure. It's our fifth essential component of our framework. And we talk about the need of leadership to make sure that all of the other components can take place. So it's not the sole focus, it wasn't the sole focus, but we really lifted up the fact that leadership was key in making sure that certain protocols, processes, and procedures were in place to support the needs of all kids. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question directly, but we did lift up professional development, leadership, effective teaming, and family and community engagement, the overarching piece of our infrastructure with other things embedded, of course, to support the work.
Wonderful. And just a quick question for you. I applaud you for focusing that. And what levels of supports are you able to provide leaders in your SPDIG currently?
So again, the old SPDIG with Grant that just said it, and then the one that we're getting ready to start, we do professional learning, and we do a lot of professional learning around the essential components, and they're encouraged to attend. As a matter of fact, we ask for a team that consists of certain members, And then those teams, we work with them at the state level. We do statewide training, but we also do coaching and support at the district level. So our coaches actually do coaching virtually, face-to-face, and some other methods. And so they're supporting the team, which would consist of leadership. So there's a huge focus on making sure that leadership is aware that there are protocols and procedures in place, that all stakeholders are on board to make sure that the work actually happens. When we put out the grant application, we're looking for commitments from the superintendent, the building level leadership. So they're the team, and that's the people that we provide supports to, hoping that they would support the implementers on the ground. I hope that answers your questions. Yeah,
it does. And I'm seeing a lot of chat too about focusing on district and school leaders. And I applaud all of you for that. I think sometimes we forget them, and they're so critical, and teachers cannot possibly implement the PD that we're providing for them if they're not in a culture that allows it and really helps facilitate it. So I'm loving that. And Amy, you had your hand up. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to add, when we started the work some years ago, we learned from previous initiatives. And so when we looked at the national model, our focus was MTSS. And when we looked at the national model, we added a fifth component, which was infrastructure. So the reason that was added was because we knew that screening and that progress monitoring and that database decision-making and supporting kids in a multi-level prevention system, that could not happen unless the infrastructure was in place. So we took the national model and added a fifth component, the base, to really clearly articulate that this work is not going to happen unless we have that supportive infrastructure.
Wonderful. And Amy, I think you had your hand up, but I'm not sure if you wanted to speak or if you were just telling me we focus on leadership. Amy Basket.
And that was a lot of what Rondalyn was saying. We're echoing a lot of the same things. In Michigan, we have 5 components as well, and ours is called team-based leadership. So our model also focuses on supporting district leadership teams, school leadership teams, and grade level teams. In much the same way of what she was talking about, and supporting them with professional learning and coaching along the way, in both behavior and reading, and then also in that data review process as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amy. And very good. And Rebecca, I agree with you that principals, school leaders need as much support now. We have a lot of novice principals. The turnover of principals is just as high, if not, I haven't looked at those numbers recently, but it's high. And superintendents. So what you have to think about, we know the stability of a principal is key for a school to be successful. And we've got that turnover too. So there does need to be support. I do have one more question about that school leadership piece. How many of you that are focusing on school leader capacity and support are looking at what else is coming at the principal that they're getting quote unquote support for? For example, some of our schools are in CSI or TSI status, right? So they might have a district improvement team focus that is coming in. And I was working with the state some time ago and pulled up work that we do at AIR, actually, where I looked at what is on the checklist and rubric for a school leader in school improvement, and compared it to what was on a checklist for a school leader helping them implement MTSS. And there's so much similarity there, but there's enough difference in language and expectations that if I were a principal, I'd have to choose which one am I going to do? Am I going to focus on MTSS or am I going to do the school improvement? But yet it's all very similar in what we do in terms of a problem-based approach, teaming, and all of that stuff. So when we talk about principals and them being overwhelmed as well, are you able to align with the other expectations or requirements that a principal has to do in addition to the work you're trying to do in your SPDIG? And Rondalyn, you have your hand up, so why don't you go first?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that we're working on intently right now is integrating our teams. A lot of schools, some schools have one team. Other schools in our state has several teams, and that's a concern that's been shared with us. So at the state level, we're working on, and it's a work in progress, working on helping districts and LEAs looking at aligning their priorities, because there are a lot of similarities between the two, how they can align their priorities so they're not overworking leadership. So we are working on that work. That's going to be a little bit of the NUSPA that we're implementing. We are focusing on a tier system of supports for reading, but going back to infrastructure, teaming is one of those essential components. So we're looking at helping districts and LEAs to have use effective teaming protocols and procedures, and not having so many teams when we're all working on the same work. So that's something we are working on.
Yeah, and it sounds easier than it is.
Yeah.
Because I've been in some very tense situations where somebody feels like they're giving something up, even with my own staff and colleagues. When I said, look, we can't have an MTSS rubric and a school of credit rubric being thrown at this principal. Let's merge them. And they would not. They were like, no, you're going to take away something that we know is important through the research. I'm like, look, we can have all the best research in the world. And if we're putting people in situations where they can't possibly be successful, it doesn't matter. It's not going to happen. And it's easy. It's harder than you think. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some strategies to help create those conditions to have those conversations. And Amy, basket.
A couple of things that they're doing in Michigan right now is one is at the department, they're trying to bring a lot of different offices together and meet to talk about like those common languages, where is there overlap, where are we doing work similar, the same, that sort of thing. How can we leverage resources to move toward common goal? And another thing, the product that came out of that work was the common vocabulary document, which is the words we're going to use across the multiple different projects and Units. Now, when we talk about coaching, this is what coaching means, so that we're not confusing people out in the field. When we we're going to now use the word professional learning. We're not going to use training. We're not going to use professional development. We're all going to try to circulate around some common language so that we start to speak the same things, so that we reduce that cognitive load out there to talk about, like, no, we are really all trying to work toward the same goal here. And a little bit of giving up a little bit of turf, a little bit, one way or the other. So hard conversations. It's not perfect, but it is definitely moving in the right direction.
Wonderful to hear that. And you said giving up a little bit. And I think we need to realize that. And, sometimes when I get into situations where in Cedar, where we bring in state education agencies across departments, not just special ed, educator effectiveness, teacher and leader preparation, all of that stuff, we bring everyone together. Like, you need to understand IHEs, faculty at general ed and special ed and leadership and districts. We all have our own agendas and what we have to do every day. And we need to understand that, but we also need to come to an agreement about where do we have some flexibility, because we all are in the same goal. I totally agree with that. But it's you have to be able to give something up, and it's hard to prioritize one thing over another. Like, do you prioritize family engagement? I mean, how do you say you're not going to work on family engagement? That's a hard thing to say. How do you say you're not going to work on literacy? But we know what kind of environment helps kids learn. It's not any different for teachers. So if teachers are in a high stress situation right now, which they are, can they take on new stuff? Can they learn new stuff? I believe they can, but they can't learn everything at one time. And so we've got to give up some things. And I think one of the best things that was ever told to me, and I've said this probably too many times in presentations, but it still resonates with me. He said, Lynn, is your free TA services like a free dog? And what he meant by that is it going to be more work for me than what I want to do? And I think about that every day. What am I doing that I say is making their job easier, but in reality, I'm making it harder? I'm requiring a plan, and I'm all about plans, because if you don't have a plan, I don't know how you get anywhere. But I also want to make sure I am not just being the compliance monitor for a plan. And I say that, and we all say we're not about compliance, but I want us to stop and think constantly, are we really true to that? Because I know there's been a lot of actions in my career that really wasn't about improvement and more about compliance, because I thought it was the right thing. But I think right now in our culture, we need to really figure this out. And I'm loving the comments I'm seeing here too in the chat. Next slide. So one of the things we've done in Cedar, and some of you have maybe have seen this before, but one of the things we've done in Cedar is really focus on establishing professional learning systems. And what we mean by that is that recognizing that no one can become an expert in just 4 years, right? It's not with everything we have to teach them. They can't be an expert in everything. And we need a coherent learning opportunities to move them beyond a novice to mastery in their field. So what is that consistent set of instructional practices if we just focus on instruction? What are they that we're teaching at a university level? And what are we trying to reinforce at a in-service level? And this all comes back to common language too. And so we really try to focus, as many of you might know, around the high leverage practices for students with disabilities. Do I believe those are the best practices? Maybe, maybe not, but I can say that if more teachers could implement those practices well in classrooms and not just general ed and special ed, we'd be in a bunch of different place. And when we first came out with those, there was a little bit of maybe a duh, these are just good practices. And I remember facilitating a group of teachers, and every time I tried to get them to evidence-based practices, they came back to high leverage practices. We didn't coin them then. And it got to me that we've got to strengthen instruction before and access to curriculum before we can get to that deeper level intensity of services. And so that's one of the things that we've really focused on, is that alignment between pre-service to in-service. It sounds easier than it is, because it's not just about common language, it's also about common expectations, and how are you leveraging all the avenues that each of us respectively have to facilitate the use of those practices and the support for teachers. Next slide. This is just something, I don't know, just some facts that from Cedar. We work across 20 states, and we have 98% of our state teams are working on strengthened partnerships. And we've got several that are integrating the HLPs into their coursework and field experiences. And then they're also partnering with their districts to support the use of HLPs. So that's just an example of how we're trying to make it a systemic, coherent professional learning system, and not so fragmented, so teachers don't feel like they're being jerked from one type of practice to another or getting mixed messages. Next slide. So let's talk about lessons learned. And there's an attachment that you can go to. I hope it's up there. If not, James will probably put it up shortly. That will go deeper into the examples by each state if you wanted to know, because I just didn't think we'd have enough time. But collaborative partnerships is key, and we know that, but do we? We use that word so clearly, but partnerships, it's about a very specific and intentional partnership. It can't just be, hey, we talk every once in a while and we share some resources, or we work together to develop a resource. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about collaborative, very intentional partnerships where we all sit down, think about what the shared vision is, and think about what role we can play to move that forward. And that is where you have to give up a little bit somewhere, or where you have to negotiate. That's been the key of Cedar's success, is bringing those faculty, the state education agency, the districts together, and having these conversations and creating a shared blueprint action plan that they all own. And it doesn't mean that the SEA is going to go in and say, at this university, you need to modify this, this, and this. The SEA might look at their program approval requirements and modify them to allow for more flexibility to reinforce what they're working for, where an EPP, an ed prep program might revise their program to ensure that certain practices are represented across the curriculum and the program. So everyone plays a different role, but that's a true collaborative partnership. It's not just knowing one another and talking every once in a while, and I'm being kind of aloof with that, but obviously there's different levels, but it's got to be very intentional, and that trust and those relationships are what make it work. And we overuse trust and relationships, but there's no research in the world that doesn't confirm the fact that trust and relationships are needed to make progress. And that takes time and has to be very intentional. Flexible TA services, and this is what we brought in, and I'm so happy about it in CEDAR 2.0. And I think you can equate it into the world that you're working in terms of these teams and so forth. But we realize that sometimes we're pulling people along and they're maybe not ready, or they don't have the buy-in, or what have you. And we only have so many resources and time. So we really started a process that we call the incubator process, where we on a regular basis work with these teams to assess where are they in this type of implementation. Do they have the right kind of leadership support? Do they have the right people at the table to really make a difference? So if we're frustrated because there's more and more special education teachers coming into the field that are less than fully prepared, then we better have certification licensure people at the table so we can talk about what policies are reinforcing or not reinforcing that. So really helping them constantly take a look at that. We have something that's called the systems change rubric, and it basically is looking at taking implementation science and situating it into the context of collaborative partnerships and their roles. So we have the teams evaluate themselves on a regular basis, and we do too, to see where they are. And what we've learned from that process, that collaborative thinking reflection process, which we know is important, is that it helps them think about what are those conditions we need to have in place for this to work? Do we have decision authority in what work we're doing? Do we have outcomes that we're tracking so that way we can plan for scale up and sustainability? So it's really helped us as a staff think through where state at, or this team at, and how do we align our TA services accordingly? So we're more flexible and nimble in our TA. And then we have cross-state learning groups, which allow different levels of engagement. There's people who want to window shop, which is perfectly fine. And what I mean by window shop, they want to learn, but they're not quite sure they're in a position to really carry it forward. And then there's expectations in teams that we have where you are required to carry it forward, because there's got to be a different level of readiness. And we don't want to say, if you're not ready, we're not going to support you, because duh, why would we do that? But at the same hand, we can't support everybody the same way if their level of readiness is different. So that has been a really wonderful piece of the work that we've done. And I've done TA in a lot of different centers, and this has been my favorite thing, because I think it helps us to be more intentional and purposeful in the way we provide supports. Delineate when virtual or in-person TA is most appropriate. And this is so important right now, right? Because people don't have time. So constantly I will ask staff, what is it that they can learn through a podcast or through listening when they have time that you don't need to have a collaborative partnership and a conversation? There's a lot you can learn about content, but how do you make it real and how do you make it happen? You need to do with conversation, practice, trial, reflection, all those things that we know. So let's not pull people together to give them knowledge. Let's pull people together to apply that knowledge. And we've got to be more creative. And we say we're going to do that, but yet we go and we have a PD day, and we spend half of the time giving them knowledge about why they need this PD, what the research says, and what are the essential components. All important, but we can do that in a virtual way. Let's save our dollars, our time, and their time to really provide the in-person collaborative work that's needed to really know how to apply a practice, try it, reflect, try again, fail, succeed, try again. That is key. Specific to state needs and attended to unique context. That's hard, but so important. We say, we don't know. Everybody's saying there's not a shortage. Some people, researchers saying we don't see a shortage. Some people say we do. And I don't know if you're in a classroom building, how you could ever say, or a classroom or a school building, how you could ever say we don't have a shortage problem. But that's neither here nor there. A lot of it is problems with the way we collect data. All I'm going to say here is how you fix rural Indiana compared to how you're fixing Indianapolis public schools when it comes to teacher quality and principal quality should be different. It's not a one size fits all approach. And we need to understand where the breakdown across the educator continuum is happening in order to address that specific need in that specific community. And we need quick wins right now. People feel frustrated. So if I go into rural Indiana, their quick win is we need teachers to come here and stay. So what are we going to do specifically to allow that to happen? Yeah, loan forgiveness is important. Don't get me wrong, recruitment's important. Mentoring and induction is important. But how do we apply it in that local context? And then that last thing is focusing on leadership preparation and support, which we talked about. Looking at the time quick.
We have about 2 minutes.
Okay. So then last thing I'll say, and you've heard me say this before, the next slide is we have to change the narrative about teaching. And that's harder to do than we think. We're doing some self-fulfilling prophecy things that we know is not something we should do for our students. So we need to be careful for our teaching. We have to bring passion back into teaching. We need to create space for teachers to have fun with their students and their peers and make connections. And all of that will lead to improved working conditions in school culture. I'm going to stop there. I've been trying to go through the chat as we're going, and I can't quite do it all at the same time, but please, somebody jump out if you have a question.
So there was a question. One of the participants would like to know if the materials are available for download.
Yes, the PowerPoint should be on your site, and then the document that I spoke about that gives you all the real examples from across your states will be available to you as well. There was a question in here that I just saw. We tried having team members learn virtually before meetings and no one would do it. Yeah, I've been there, done that many times. In fact, I'm going to go to a meeting right here in a minute, and I know no one's read it ahead of time. And I think that's reality, but I also think we have to get back to what do we all have on their plate and what kind of voice and ownership and empowerment have they had on the topic? Because if they don't see a relevance to their work or they don't have the time, they're probably not going to do it ahead of time. So we've got to find that time, and we got to protect that time for them. They don't want to not be good. They need time and space to be good.